we can be fairly assured that there's no trade union or workers' right group that would take that particular parable of the gospel as part of their charter. Of course, as I explained in the bulletin today, the best explanation is that Jesus, of course, is referring to the self-righteous Pharisees who were always complaining to him that he was too fair and too kind to sinners. They didn't deserve to be welcomed into God's kingdom, as it were, or to receive any special reward, for they were latecomers. And while the Pharisees had kept all the rules and regulations, and these sinners should be at the bottom of the pile. Just as in the early church there was a squabble too, and this parable may well have been used to refer to the disagreement that the Christians had among themselves, those who came from a Jewish background and those who came from a Gentile, non-Jewish background. The Jewish ones felt that they should have a higher status at all levels and all places, as it were. So Jesus points out that he is kind that God the Father is kind even to the latecomers. But one little phrase that jumps out, especially at this time, is this business of the workers that are not hired, in other words, the unemployed. Of course, this is not something new. People have struggled to find the best employment that suits them throughout the ages. And at this time of the COVID virus, there are plenty of people who are, as it were, very nervous about what's going to happen in life and their lives, and as far as their employment goes. The unemployed. Well, the first group that comes to mind, of course, are the migrant, the recent arrivals. And I'm well versed in that because my own parents were displaced persons after the Second World War. Even though both my mother and father never had troubles about employment, although Dad, perhaps wrongly, never continued his magnificent trade of very elite cabinet making and French polishing. Instead, he worked very hard as a fettler, as a labourer, as a ganger on the railways, the WAGR, for most of his life. And Mum, of course, was a magnificent cook and domestic, and she was always welcomed at any hospital or nursing home to help there. But I remember stories of that era, and one particular story, which I'm sure you've heard me talk about before, was the, at times, unreasonable demands that employers would make on these foreigners. First, because perhaps they couldn't speak the language well enough, but then secondly, were they up to Australian standards? And did they know their job according to the rules and regulations of this country, their new country? Well, there is the story told of the medical profession fellow, I don't know if he was a surgeon or a physician, that of course had to go before the board and be examined by a panel. And of course they didn't make it too easy on him, but they made sure that they had the latest textbooks and questioned him on various procedures and whatever. And to their amazement, this particular fellow knew his stuff better than they even knew it. And they had sort of found, the very latest of what was happening in the profession and so on. And one of them actually then said, "Well, doctor, how is it that you are so familiar with this latest method? We've only started using it ourselves here." He says, "Go to the front page of the textbook there, and what name do you read there?" "That's me. I wrote the book." Of course, that's an anecdotal sort of story, and not every new migrant can claim such fame, as it were. But nevertheless, we know that at times we can be very dismissive of the talents and the skills and the perhaps at times over-compliance that we expect of our migrant workers. And then, of course, you've got youth, young people, and how employment for them has so dramatically changed over the last 100 years as apprenticeship seems to have declined. Many of the jobs that were there when I was a kid, you had no trouble getting a summer job. You were welcomed in all sorts of places, and because industry and work was very different, and how that has changed. We don't longer have our cars filled up by the kid that works the pumps and cleans your windscreen. No, we do it ourselves, and so on. There's so many huge changes. So without going into the as it were, the theology of work and the necessity of work and the reason for work and all that, the business of unemployment is going to be a big issue in our lives, particularly, I think, over the next few months and years. I know that Pope Francis has been talking about this and talking about the new poor that are going to suddenly emerge when people begin to lose their jobs, when people can't afford their mortgages, and they're going to be out on the streets. So, as a community of Mary of the Cross Mackillop, Ballajura, we need to start thinking about what's our responsibility. Perhaps we should, a few of us at least, or those who've got the time and interest to share their experience of what's happened to them and what we should do. Perhaps we should examine the facts and line them up with what the Christian response ought to be. But most importantly, we can't just, as it were, think about it, talk about it, and even pray about it, but never get off our backsides and do something about it. So the unemployment issue will be one. I'm sure there'll be many others also as a result of this pandemic and the sort of things that we're living through. I hope that we as a Catholic community here in Ballajura will play our part and do it well.